Welcome to our Tuesday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing a series that I just started yesterday talking about how to become a water walker. You know, this is something that the Lord showed me back in the 1990s. I remember the day that I was studying here in Matthew chapter 14, and it's just like God began to download to me basically everything that is necessary to experience the miraculous in your life. These 11 verses in Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33, it just has everything that you need. It was powerful. And it blessed me so much that this is back before I was on television. I was only on radio, and I had a recording studio in my home, and I sat down and for about 6 or 7 hours, I just taught straight through this. I mean, it was like a download. And so this is something the Lord showed me a long time ago. So we are now offering my book on how to become a water walker. We're asking for a donation of any amount for this book, whatever you can give. We want you to get this teaching. I promise you it's going to make a difference in your life. And then we have a brief summary of the book. If you could not or would not send anything for it, we'll give you a brief summary of it. And also, these little booklets are a great thing to just lay around, like if you have a business, or you can give these to people, and it's just a tremendous thing. Then we have CDs, DVDs, a USB, and also a study guide. So I just started this series yesterday. Let me read back again through these verses. This is Matthew chapter 14, and in verse 22 it says, "And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship, and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went into a mountain apart to pray, and when even was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. And so again, these scriptures are just powerful. So let me go back. Yesterday in verse 22, I was making a major point out of the fact that Jesus had to constrain his disciples to get into the ship and go to the other side. The word constrain means he had to use some kind of force. I don't think it was physical force, like he didn't physically restrain them, but with his words, he compelled them, constrained them to get into the ship because they could tell that a storm was coming. But to their credit, they went ahead and did what the Lord told them to do, even though everything in the natural was telling them that this is a bad time to be getting into a boat and going out on the Sea of Galilee at nighttime. They went against their own wisdom. This is what Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 says, Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. So they were doing what God told them to do, even though in the natural it didn't look like something smart to do. That's one of the first things you've got to do in order to see the miraculous power of God in your life. Did you know that the average person lives their life so cautiously? They're so afraid of failure, so afraid that they're going to do something wrong, that they just never get out. They never do anything. They never put themselves in a position of risk. You know, I remember when our school first started and we took our students on a foreign missions trip and we had them on a bus in Ireland, and I remember that during the night we would make our students pray for people that came down. And some of them had never prayed for a person before. And on the bus the next day we would kind of have a debrief. And these students were just over the moon talking about, man, I've never prayed for anybody. And I laid hands on somebody and saw people that couldn't walk. They started seeing miracles. But see, most people avoid putting themselves in that situation. We just got through with what we call our Healing is Here conference. And one of the things that Daniel Amstutz and 𝗪 𝗪𝗂𝗪 did when they ministered, at the end of their ministry, they were talking about how you minister healing to other people. And then they said, who would be brave enough just to raise your hand and say that I've never prayed for another person? And there was about, I'm guessing, but there was at least 20, it could have been 30 or 40 people that had never prayed for another person. And so they had those people come down front. And you know what they did? They had them turn around, face the crowd, and they said, now, anybody who needs prayer for healing, anybody with pain in your body, come down here and let them pray for it. And they put these people on the spot. And these people had never prayed for a person. They gave them some instruction about not to beg God, not to ask, but to take their authority and speak. And did you know, out of those people that had never prayed for a person, there was one person that was instantly healed and took a brace off and was completely healed. There was another person that had a shoulder problem and couldn't raise their arm. And I mean, they were swinging their arm around with no problem. People that had never prayed for a person before had the supernatural power of God flowing through them, and miracles were taking place. Why? Because somebody kind of constrained them to do something, to put themselves in a position to where they needed the supernatural power of God to flow through them. I tell you, if you are so afraid that you're going to make a mistake, that you're going to do something wrong, so that you just always, you're like water that takes the path of least resistance. You always go to the lowest level. You are never going to extend yourself, put yourself in a position where you could fail. I tell you, if that's the way that you're living your life, you will not see the miraculous power of God. If these disciples had just leaned unto their own understanding and said, man, this is crazy. I can tell a storm is coming. I grew up on this lake. I've fished on this lake. My wisdom, I know I'm right. And if they would have leaned to their own understanding, they would have missed Jesus walking on the water, and Peter would have missed walking on the water. In order for you to receive a miracle, you got to obey God and go against your own understanding and do what God told you to do. Man, I could make a million applications of this, but one that just pops to mind is that there's a lot of people that want God to prosper them financially, and they are needing a financial miracle, and yet they have never started tithing. It's not that they don't want to tithe. They say, well, I would tithe if I had the extra money. Did you know a tithe isn't a certain amount, it's a percentage. And so if all you got is $10, you got to tithe, that's $1. If you would tithe off of what you've got, and some people say, but I need all of this. If you would just do what God tells you to do, then you put yourself in a position for the miraculous supply of God to come unto you. But if you won't do what the Word says, if you won't tithe, if you won't give, God says, give and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over shall men give into your bosom. If you won't give, you aren't going to see the miraculous power of God. It's not because God doesn't love you, but He's given you seeds. And if you don't plant those seeds, if you eat all of your seeds, then you're eventually going to go hungry. In order for you to experience the supernatural, miraculous power of God in your finances, you got to start giving. You got to do what He says. If these disciples had not done what He told them to do and got into the ship and headed in the other direction, they would not have experienced this miracle. We would not be talking about them 2,000 years later. But because they did what God told them to do, they put themselves in a position for a miracle. You have to position yourself. And the way you position yourself is by doing what God told you to do, even if it goes against your own understanding. Also, He said, go to the other side. He didn't tell them to go halfway and drown. They had a word from God, the same one who created the heavens and the earth, who created all of that water that they were on, who created the wind and everything. The same one who created everything by His word gave them a word that said, go to the other side. And I'm not trying to rag on these disciples. There's a reason that they were called disciples, because I mean, they were just slow sometimes. But he didn't tell them to go halfway and drown. They had a word from God that if they would have mixed it with faith, it would have gotten them to the other side on their faith. That's what it says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 2, talking about the Israelites. It says that the word was preached unto them the same as it's been preached unto us, but it didn't profit them because it wasn't mixed with faith in them that heard it. Man, you've got millions and millions of promises, words from God right here in the Bible, but you've got to mix it with faith. And God ordained that you be above only and not beneath, the head and not the tail, out of Deuteronomy chapter 28. 1 John chapter 5 says, this is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith. God always causes us to triumph. We have promises that we're going to get to the other side, and if you would mix it with faith, that word that God has given you has more than enough power to bring you to the destination that God has for you. Man, that's powerful. I've got 11 verses to cover, and I'm in my second day, and I'm still on the first verse in this thing. But man, I could just keep multiplying and talking about this because this is so critical. Most people don't even put themselves in a position for a miracle. They don't need a miracle because they are just shooting at nothing and hitting it every time. You know, you gotta increase what you're believing for. You gotta believe for something more. So many, churches today, so many denominations, they preach that all salvation is getting your sins forgiven so you won't go to hell, but instead you'll get to go to heaven when you die. And then in this life, there is no healing, there is no prosperity, there is no joy. You are supposed to suffer and you just hold on and you struggle through this life. And so many denominations have just lowered the bar so that nobody is expecting anything from God. They are shooting at nothing and hitting it every time. I tell you, you need to start believing for something more. And these disciples, to their credit, they went against their own thinking and began to do what God told them to do. So in verse 23 it says that when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray, and when the even come, he was there alone. So this shows you that Jesus sent the disciples in this boat by themselves to the other side, and he went up into a mountain to pray. But it's important for you to recognize that he was not in somebody's house. He wasn't in a hotel in a bed and outside of the storm and unaware. Jesus had to constrain his disciples to do this. So this meant that he was responsible for them. Boy, this is another great truth. That you know what, when you are doing what God told you to do, then God is responsible for what it takes to help you accomplish that. You know, 𝗪𝗓𝗋𝗃𝗃, who works with us and they run our school and stuff, she has this saying about His will, His bill. If you know that you're doing what God has told you to do, then He is responsible for bringing you the finances to get it accomplished. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8 says, and God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may abound unto every good work. God is responsible. When you are doing what He told you to do, then He takes responsibility for making the provision so you can get it done. And so I'm bringing all of that out to say that Jesus had to constrain these disciples. This wasn't their wisdom. If it had been left up to them, they'd have never gotten in that boat and have headed to the other side. So He had to constrain them, compel them. That meant that He was responsible and He wasn't asleep someplace out of the storm. He was in the storm. He knew the adversity that they were going through. And whatever you are going through, the Lord knows it. You know, anyway, I don't want to go into a lot of detail on this, but the Lord has blessed us with a house that is adjacent to our ministry property here. And did you know we bought that house not knowing that there was a dirt road that connected my house over to the ministry property. And today I was driving over that dirt road to come over here, and I was just thinking that this was done 20 or 30 years before I bought that property. We bought that property without knowing the connection, and it's just like God had someone do this. And I don't know who did it. I don't know how it got done. But I was just thinking, God, you made provision for me decades before I even owned this property, decades before I needed it. Did you know that God is so awesome? He knows what we need before we know what we need. God is not unaware of your situation. And if you are doing what He told you to do, He has everything lined up. He has everything provided that you need in order to accomplish that. So I get this from this passage of Scripture, that Jesus, He was in that same storm. He was the one responsible for them being out there, and He knew exactly what was going on. Sometimes when we are in a crisis situation, we want to be like in the 4th chapter of the book of Mark, where Jesus was in the boat with His disciples, and the wind and the waves were beating into the ship, and they woke Him up and they said, "Master, don't you care that we perish?" And of course, that is a totally wrong thing to say, but I can guarantee you there are people watching this program right now that you're in a crisis situation, and it's just like, God, don't you care? You know, I remember a time when Jamie and I first got married, and I apologize. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I was so excited about being called into the ministry that I was pouring concrete for a living. But when Jamie and I got married, I just made a clean break, and I said, that's it. From now on, I'm going full-time in the ministry. And I didn't know until later. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 says that if you are ministering, you live proportional to the ministry that you had. I was only ministering in a little tiny Bible study to just a few people, and I should have kept working a secular job. But I just was so excited about going full-time in the ministry that I threw caution to the wind. I quit my job, and I just got out on faith. I actually had $5,000 in the bank when Jamie and I got married, and I was so excited to get out into just nothing but total faith that I took that $5,000, put it in $100 bills, and went to a 7-Eleven and just gave it away to people all in one day. Boy, that is dumb to the second power. That is ignorance gone to seed. But that's what I did. And so anyway, Jamie and I were struggling financially, and I remember we had gone over a week without any food at all, and we had 75 cents left. And Jamie took the 75 cents and took some clothes, put them in our car, and drove to a laundromat to wash clothes. And while she was gone, we hadn't eaten in a week, and I was feeling responsible for Jamie, and I called it prayer, but the truth was I was complaining. I was griping, and I said, God, I'd give my right arm to feed Jamie, implying that he doesn't love Jamie as much as I did. And boy, I mean, right in the midst of that, the Lord spoke to me from Luke 12:32, says, "Fear not, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." And I mean, God lovingly rebuked me and put me in my place, saying, are you implying that I don't provide for you? And I realized that, man, that was wrong. And I repented, and I just rose up in faith, and I said, we are going to eat today. So when Jamie got back from washing clothes, I told her what the Lord had said to me. I said, we are going to have something to eat today. And at lunch, we had nothing. At supper, we had nothing. And we went to church that night, and a guy came up to me and he said, would you come over to my apartment? He lived in the same apartment complex we did. And he said, would you come over to my apartment after church tonight? And so Jamie and I, we didn't say anything to him. We would never do that and impose on people. But we thought to ourselves, man, maybe we're going to get something to eat. So we went over there and we visited with them for like nearly an hour, and they never even offered us anything to drink. And so anyway, Jamie and I were just getting up, and we were getting ready to leave and go home. And right as we were leaving, he says, oh, I've got something for you. And he said, I came over today to give this to you, but your car was gone, so I figured you weren't home, and I thought I'd just wait until tonight and he gave us 10 or 20 pounds worth of fish that he had caught, and it had all of the trimmings. He gave us all of this other food to go with it. Jamie and I went home. She cooked it up in just a few minutes before midnight. We ate food that day. The next day was my birthday, and I had a woman in our church come and bring me an entire cardboard box of nothing but porterhouse steaks. We went from famine to feast just nearly overnight because I recognized that God cared about me. It was His good pleasure to give me the kingdom, and that I had gotten into doubt and unbelief, thinking that He didn't care. See, again, I get this from this story, that Jesus was the one that compelled them to get into the ship, and they did it against their own wisdom. He was responsible for what they were going through. He was not in a house someplace. He was out in the same storm. He was aware of what was going on, and Jesus was coming to rescue them and to make provision for them. I can guarantee you, whatever you're going through, it's the exact same thing with you. That if you have done what God has told you to do, that He never calls you to do something and then expects you to get it done in your own strength and power with your own resources. Did you know when God asked Mary to receive the seed and to become the mother of Jesus, did you know that the wise men came and brought silver and gold and frankincense? And one guy, Peter Daniels, figured this out, that it was the equivalent of a fortune. God asked somebody else to birth and to raise His Son, but He didn't expect them to do it at their own expense. He gave them more than enough money. I guarantee you, He paid them well for what they did. God is 𝗪𝗁𝗍𝗍, not 𝗪𝗁𝗍𝗄𝗏. And if you are doing what God has told you to do, you can expect for God to meet the need. Again, I get all of that from these passages of Scripture. Hello, this is Andrew Wommack, and if you've enjoyed our program there on YouTube, I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this with other people because, man, these truths will set people free. So check it out, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.